Welcome to The Real Story with Jeanne Ives. You know, we started this podcast to give you information that you may not be aware of, to put in front of you people that you may not have heard from that have expertise on particular topics that affect you. And in addition to doing the podcast, I also do something every week called Reveille. And for me, being military, it really kind of suits me. It's a wake-up call. Reveille is typically your wake-up call. And so I do these 2-minute reveilles. You may have heard them on WIND AM 560 in the morning. They air on Tuesday mornings at about 7:35 on every Tuesday morning. You'll hear my 2-minute reveille. It's about usually 2 minutes about a topic that I think is important for people to understand a little bit more. Just grab your attention so that you can then go ahead and look for more information on your own on that particular area. So I frequently have gotten this criticism, and so I want to basically set the record straight here. So when you do hear my reveille, what we do at first, hang on here as I get my phone going again. What we do start with is we start with something that sounds like this. Okay, so people have told me, Jeanne, that's not reveille, that is first call. And I said, yeah, absolutely, that is first call. And so what first call is it's a pre-reveille courtesy signal, and it's sounded before reveille. So reveille, I'm the reveille, I'm the wake-up call. And so we do first call as an intro to the reveille, which is me speaking for about 2 minutes about a particular topic. And I've covered a number of topics, everything from education to gas prices to corruption to you name it, just all sorts of, in fact, boy, I don't know how many reveilles I've done, but I've been doing it now for well over a year, probably about 15 months worth. So one every week. It's a lot of reveilles that we've had. But I just wanted to kind of set the record straight for people who listen to our podcast, people who may hear me on WIND. Yeah, I do understand it. I get it. I'm a West Pointer. I heard reveille every morning that I woke up there. And I do understand what first call is and what reveille is. And so just to let you know, we bring in first call as the bugle signal to the reveille, which is me and my 2-minute topic. So anyway, just wanted to set the record straight on that. Well, I think we all need a reveille on something else too. Of course, in fact, I could just retitle my entire podcast Reveille, but of course, the staff would go absolutely nuts if we rebrand it again, so we won't do that. We'll just call it The Real Story. So in The Real Story today, I've got about a couple segments I wanted to cover with you. One of them I find it just fascinating, and I just pulled up this WirePoints article today, and we go to WirePoints a lot because they write good stuff. And this is from my buddy Mark Lennon, and the title is Lake Michigan water levels have dropped to near normal, so yet another climate explanation emerges. Now, the reason I found this article just fascinating is because in 2020, when I was running for Congress against Sean Casten made a big deal that year that we had rising sea levels, that Lake Michigan was at its near highest. And in fact, that is absolutely true. I'm reading from another article, December 3rd, 2019. Lake Michigan still near record high levels. Infrastructure and beaches are suffering. And it just goes on and on about the battering of the lakeshore continues each time the winds and waves pick up along the Berrien County beaches, dunes, bluffs, and now infrastructure are struggling to withstand the power of Lake Michigan. Beaches from New Buffalo to South Haven are withering away, losing foot after foot of sand, courtesy of the incredibly high water levels. And of course, I was like, well, that's strange, because I definitely remember not that many years ago where they were complaining that Lake Michigan is at record low levels. And so I looked it up. And sure enough, reading from this physics.org article, this one's dated February 8th, 2013. Lake Michigan hits record low level. And it says, and the article written by Dan Egan says, Lake Michigan has officially sunk to an all-time low. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers reported Tuesday that in January, the lake plunged below its previous record low set in March of 1964. So they had a record low level in March of 1964. Now they're coming back, and in February of 2013, they're reporting another all-time record low. So what's happened in between those record lows? Well, obviously it's risen and gone up and down and gone up and down. Okay, the water is now more than 6 feet below the record high set in October 1986. The water level is tracked by gauges, blah, 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 goes on and on. So the point of that is that I knew I had remembered a story where Lake Michigan had been at record lows. So when Sean Casten was there in the 2020 election, just babbling on about climate change this, and just decarb and everything, don't use any fossil fuels. Meanwhile, his wife drives an SUV, so he's a total hypocrite. And he jetted off at that time with Nancy Pelosi to Spain for some sort of climate conference in a big jet. I mean, why didn't he take the slow boat? I don't know, because he's a hypocrite. And he's a goofball on top of it. But so he's babbling on about these record high levels in Lake Michigan. And then now what we have 2 years later, 2 years later, Lake Michigan water levels have dropped to near normal. So, I mean, you cannot make this up. These people will just, go into hysterical. They will be hysterical over things that they can't explain, and why? Because the climate's always changing, by the way. And nobody's saying that the climate doesn't change. Listen, it was hotter 1,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago. Guess what? 85% of the state of Illinois was covered in a glacier. And what happened? Oh, the temperature heated up, and guess what? Now we have beautiful, fertile farmland underneath that glacier. And in the Mark Glennon article, this is really, really good. He writes this. He says, global warming, we were told, warming was evaporating the Great Lakes. Nobel Prize-winning Al Gore said. Among others saying the same was Illinois Senator Dick Durbin. You could add Sean Casten to that. What we are seeing in global warming is the evaporation of our Great Lakes, he said. Meanwhile, just 2 years ago, it was the rising sea levels that were a problem. Now it's the evaporation of our Great Lakes. Why were the lake levels near record highs in 2020, causing extensive shoreline damage? Mark Glennon asked the same question I asked of Sean Casten. Undeterred by contradiction, it was global warming again, we were told. In fact, that's when hysteria in Chicago about warming reached high tide. City of Chicago declares climate crisis after storms caused millions of dollars in damage to Lake Michigan shoreline. That was the ABC News national headline. The claims from the city council in its crisis resolution were as extreme as you can find on global warming. We had to end the sixth mass extinction, it said, requiring an emergency mobilization on a scale not seen since World War II. Earth is already too hot for safety and justice. Who are they kidding? We've had one of the coldest springs on record, by the way. Anyway, the resolution demanded a just managed divestment and phase out of all fossil fuels. Well, they're getting that. They're getting that. And what's happening as they phase out fossil fuels in the state of Illinois? What did Ameren announce that this year? Oh, you can expect rolling blackouts and much higher prices. Why? Because they got rid of fossil fuels. And instead, in the midst of a food shortage that is coming up that everybody's predicting, they're trying to cover fertile farmland with solar panels from China. These people are nuts. They're absolutely crazy. Anyway, going on in this article by Mark Glennon, and by the way, you can go to wirepoints.org and read this for yourself. He brings up a really, really good point. It's pretty lengthy. It goes on stuff, but I thought this was particularly interesting. He says maybe there's another explanation for the big spike up in lake levels between 2013 and 2020. For that, there's something called the Occam's razor. That's the principle that the simplest explanation is probably the right one. What might that simpler explanation be? It rained a lot. That, in fact, was an explanation provided at the time by an atmospheric scientist at Argonne National Laboratory. In a nutshell, the main reason that you had this, a lot more water in the lake, the main reason is it really just has rained a lot, he told WTTW. Once the soil is saturated, all that water runs straight off into the Great Lakes rather than being absorbed into the soil and evaporated. At least one science, Mark Glennon goes on in his article, I'm reading from it, At least one scientist's work I found does make a plausible case that Great Lakes water levels might be going up and down further than before. However, his claims are very modest and conditional, and he makes them without the hubris and hyperbole that we often see in climate scientists. That's Drew Gronenwald of the University of Michigan. His video presentation that you can link to at the website, at the WirePoints article, and his paper discusses that. Based on a forward-looking model and the premise that temperatures are higher and it's raining more often, his paper concludes that the chances of extreme departures from average lake levels, like we've had recently, are 2.1% or 3% more likely than the historical norms under two scenarios he modeled. That's certainly not much to worry about, writes Mark Glenn, and I agree. It's also worth remembering, and this is what I really find fascinating, it's also worth remembering that if you want to look much further back in history and over longer periods, you'll find truly whopping variations in Lake Michigan levels. In 1989, salvage divers found something they didn't expect 15 miles out from Chicago Harbor. What did they find? Tree stumps. The stumps were the remains of a forest that radioactive dating indicated grew there some 8,000 years ago, now 80 feet underwater. But by 5,500 years ago, the level had surged to over 20 feet higher than today. If you are familiar with Ridge Road around Chicago, you may know that it really is on a ridge for the most part. That ridge was once the shoreline. If you live east of it and dig down far enough, you'll find sand. So, stop the hysteria. All these people just, honestly, they don't have they look very short term. They're not looking long term at how the climate has changed, and they're actually creating a lot more havoc. Not to mention, we are very blessed to have fossil fuels in our lives. Why? Because we've got machinery that then can absolutely do things like, build big water pumps and move that water where we want it to be moved. Doesn't that count for something? Isn't that a valuable thing? We've always been able to essentially acclimate ourselves to the changing of the climate, and I don't see why that won't happen in the future. What won't happen in the future is all of us will be devastated if we actually move to full wind and solar power. Because that all needs backup too. It's completely unreliable energy. We've talked about that extensively. Anyway, just when you read these headlines in the mainstream media, please take note of what's been happening over time as far as the climate is concerned. So just wanted to weigh in on that because I did find it interesting that this is once again a topic of discussion as it was 2 years ago when I was in that congressional race. One more fine point on that. Sean Casten, literally, he sits on the House Financial Services Committee, and he represents Illinois. We don't have any oceans here. We have Lake Michigan, great. We don't have oceans here, and he actually represents 25 miles inland from Lake Michigan. So we have flooding issues, sure, but we don't have the rising tides, and the rising sea levels are not going to affect home values in the state of Illinois. They're not going to affect anything like hurricane devastation. That's not going to happen in his district. But that's what he was concerned about when he was on the House Financial Services Committee. In fact, when he got a chance to talk to the Treasury Secretary at that time, what he decided to talk about is, what are you going to do with people who have mortgages on property that literally gets devastated by rising sea levels to the point where they're underwater, the actual house is underwater. So Sean Casten wasn't worried about his constituents. He was more worried about his progressive ideas of climate change and how he could weave in some talking points and how he wanted to be the protector of people living on coastal areas that may be affected, he thinks, by rising sea levels. I mean, the guy's just garbage. So anyway, he's up again for election, and if people are paying attention to this podcast and want to share it with him, great. Go ask Sean Casten how he feels about rising tides again, especially in light of the fact that now, 2 years later, Lake Michigan is almost back to normal levels. Somebody please Show up at his town hall and ask him that question. Okay, coming up in our next segment, we're going to talk about gas prices. And we'll be listening to, of course, Senator Stabenow. And as Marie Antoinette said, let them eat cake. Debbie Stabenow wants to say, let them drive a Tesla. Be right back with you. Welcome back to segment 2. This is The Real Story with Jeanne Ives. And I'll tell you the real story. The real story is that Monday, I got stuck in Cook County and I had to fill up with gas. And sure enough, I pull into the station and I just started pumping gas. I'll admit I didn't really look at the price at that time. And when the tank ended filling up, it was over $98. $98 for, just under 17 gallons to put in my Ford Explorer. And then I glanced over at the price. I mean, I had to buy the gas regardless, so I was going to fill up. $5.99. $5.99, just under $6. I was like, what the hell? I mean, nobody can afford these gas prices. Well, maybe J.B. Pritzker, but that's about it. I mean, it's outrageous, the gas price, the cost of gas these days. Oh, but you know what? Those Democrats have an idea for you. Hey, here's an idea. According to Senator Debbie Stabenow, a Democrat from Michigan, she said it doesn't matter how high gas prices go because she drives an electric vehicle. She sparked a backlash as gas prices in the United States have climbed to record highs with no short-term relief in sight. And in fact, everything that I've been reading says that this is going to continue. This is not just a short-term problem. This is a problem, folks, I tell you, because I can literally remember 2 years ago filling up for $35 for the entire tank, 17 gallons, about $2.05. And now, $98. Oh my gosh. I mean, push is going to come to shove. And guess what happens when gas prices go that high? You have no choice but to back off of other things. So guess your charitable donations will go down. You won't be eating out as much. You'll stop buying new clothes. You'll be buying, more chicken, less beef, whatever it is. Maybe you can't even afford to have meats in your diet anymore. I mean, this is what's going to happen. The energy is everything. It's the master resources. But apparently, Debbie Stabenow doesn't care. Listen to her testimony. Listen to her what she said about this particular event.
On the issue of gas prices, after waiting for a long time to have enough chips in this country to finally get my electric vehicle, I got it and drove it from Michigan to here this last weekend and went by every single gas station, and it didn't matter how high it was. And so I'm looking forward to the opportunity for us to move to vehicles that aren't going to be dependent on the whims of the oil companies and the international markets.
Can you imagine saying, how out of touch can you be? Oh, I just drove right past those gas stations. It didn't matter how high the gas price was. Well, first of all, not everybody can afford a $100,000 Tesla because that's what they cost. That's what they cost, Debbie from Detroit or Debbie from Michigan. I mean, it's unbelievable that the Democrats are saying this and people are actually suffering from high gas prices, and she just doesn't care at all. She should be vilified, and I think she is getting vilified. The average cost for an electric vehicle is $60,000. That's the average cost. If you want a Tesla, and she was waiting in the market for her electrical vehicle, she finally got one, and she drove it from Michigan to D.C. and didn't matter how high the gas prices were, not according to her. I mean, it's outrageous. Well, I mean, Illinois, it's even worse. But for example, your legislators, they signed on to the Clean Energy Jobs Program, and as part of that, their goal is to have 1 million electrical vehicles on the roads by 2030. Well, how many electrical vehicles do you think that we have in the state of Illinois right now? With 8 years to go, less than 8 years to hit that goal. Oh, about 38,000. Well, you know what? The other really bad thing about this is that the Rivian company that took up ownership of the the Mitsubishi plant that went basically went away in Normal, Illinois. Rivian took that up, and they were going to start to produce electrical vehicles, but they're having problems now too. And in fact, Ford Motor Company absolutely backed out of a partnership that they had with them. So first of all, you're not going to be able to get an electrical vehicle. She's told you herself she had to wait for hers, but now gas prices don't matter to anybody. I mean, she's so out of touch. These politicians, including J.B. Pritzker, including your Democrat legislators in the suburbs here, they're so out of touch. They don't care about you. Have you figured that out? Well, with high gas prices, people are actually fleeing the borders of the state of Illinois to try and find some relief across the border. And it was just reported this week that prices in Missouri are about $1 cheaper per gallon than they are in the state of Illinois. I witnessed that myself just driving a couple weeks ago. I had to go from Illinois to South Dakota to visit my mother. And as soon as I hit the border of Iowa, I was nearly out of gas, so I filled up. And it was 94 cents cheaper in Iowa across the border than it was in Wheaton, where I had filled up before. Well, I hadn't filled up, but where the last time where I had come from. So cheaper in Iowa, $1 per gallon cheaper in Missouri. And why is that? Well, part of it is because we have high gas taxes. And I'm going to share with you this this graphic that we did here at Breakthrough Ideas. We did it with information that was provided to us from Ted Dabrowski at wirepoints.org. And it's kind of an anatomy of Illinois' record high gas prices. So if you look at the base gas price, and we're just going to go with, we've actually, to find the base gas price, it's really hard. You have to basically back out the taxes to get a big base gas price. And this was done a couple weeks ago. So probably the base gas price is a little bit higher now. But back then, $4.13. And add on to that $4.13, you have to add on 39 cents for a state motor fuel tax. You have to add on 18 cents for a federal motor fuel tax. You have to add on state sales tax of 27 cents. You have additional state fees of 1 cent. And then you had additional county motor fuel tax fees of 8 cents. And that's how you get to your overall price of $5.11. So you're looking at nearly a $1 in taxes if you fill up in the state of Illinois, which is why it's $1 cheaper in Missouri. I mean, you can't make this up. It's just unreal. Okay, so, here's the deal. Apparently, Senator Duckworth thinks that she has the solution. Well, first of all, let's get to Pritzker. Governor Pritzker, he's got the solution. Here's an article from Center Square by Greg Bishop. Pritzker touts income and property tax rebates to offset record gas prices driven by high gas taxes. So Pritzker doubles the gas tax, and his solution is to give you $300 in a property tax abatement, which, by the way, is going to get all eaten up when your school districts raise taxes to the max this December. So that's all going to go away. That $300 is going to be absolutely eaten up in higher property taxes. But he thinks it's should be there to alleviate your problem at the pump. The article says Illinois' average price per gallon of regular gas is now a full $1 more than neighboring Missouri, driven mainly by the state's gas and sales tax on top of the cost of fuel. Some want a special session of the state legislature to take more action. No, they haven't done anything yet. And by the way, Republicans voted for this BS too. The average price of regular gas in Illinois Wednesday was $5.53 a gallon. Illinois' average Wednesday is a full $1 more than a month ago and $2.20 more than a year ago. The national average is $4.95. So right there, almost 60 cents higher than the national average. J.B. Pritzker said the increased price of gas is a global market problem, saying a lot of the increase is because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and inflation. Gas prices started rising, though, we know, well before the war in Ukraine, and many blame Biden's green energy agenda, which I think is the case, too. Okay, Pritzker goes on to say, I don't think anybody expected that we'd be here with regard to gasoline prices. What? Okay, so do something about it. If it's unexpected, do something about it. Give some real tax relief. Like you, I drive by the signs. I pull into a gas station. Does anybody believe that he pulls into a gas station and pumps his own gas? Does anybody believe? Laughable. Yeah, no, he doesn't. He has no idea. He. You know what? He was born on third base and thinks he hit a triple. That's exactly right. There are places in the country where it's $6 or $7 or $9 a gallon. Well, at least he understands that. He doesn't understand the problem, though. And then we've got other, just people, politicians saying nothing. Illinois State Senate President Don Harmon's spokesman, John Patterson, said, nothing in Illinois caused prices of $5 or more a gallon. Washington needs to act. Oh, well, you could do something about it, too. After all, it's your party that's controlling Washington, right? I tell you what. Anyway, so Governor Pritzker is basically saying, hey, guess what? I'll give you a little bit of a tax break on your property to compensate for the high gas taxes that I'm actually the one responsible for. And of course, feckless Republicans. Oh, people like David Welter who voted for the tax increase. People need to vote him out. Okay. Well, what is Senator Tammy Duckworth? Okay, so they're pointing to the federal level. Well, let's go see what the senator wants to do. What is Senator Tammy Duckworth? She's up for election this year. What does she want to do about high gas prices? Since her buddies in Illinois, her Democrat buddies, say that she should be doing something. Well, this article comes to us from Peoria. It's a local news article. And it says, Senator Duckworth, pain at the pump is due to corporate greed. Oh, that's the problem. That's the problem. Those oil companies are just greedy. Wait a minute. But Pritzker said that the increased price of gas is a global market problem. So is this a global market problem or is it corporate greed, Tammy Duckworth? What's going on here? So reading the article, U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth, I can't, Duckworthless is actually the better name for her, has a plan to fight those high gas prices. She said she proposed a bill in March to combat price gouging at the pump and the supermarket. The bill would tax price gouging companies for their excessive profits. She said oil companies are using the war in Ukraine as an excuse to drive up prices. Not true. Not true. You have a global market problem, according to your own Democrat leader here in Illinois. Plus, we know that it's a commodity. Oil's a commodity, and it's affected by all sorts of issues, not just the war in Ukraine. And gas prices started going up before. But by the way, we used to be energy independent, and now you've got Biden, begging enemies like Venezuela and OPEC countries to produce more. So what is the deal here? And so, but she wants to blame price gouging companies and she wants to tax their excess profits. That's her idea. So Duckworth says this. Duckworth said oil companies have stopped drilling in an effort to keep prices high. They've stopped drilling in many of the areas that they have a leased land from their taxpayers and have all the permits they need to drill and produce more oil. So she thinks they're price gouging. She thinks they don't want to drill. Well, let's look into that. This is an article written yesterday. I'm recording this on June 9th, so this is June 8th. This is a opinion piece, a commentary written in the Wall Street Journal, very reliable paper. Why energy companies won't produce. Subtitle: They expect the war on fossil fuels to resume when the current crisis ends. That's why they're not drilling. That's why they're not producing oil, Senator Duckworth. Let me read a little bit. President Biden has urged oil and natural gas companies to ramp up production, and you'd think, given the current high prices, that would be in their interest to do so. But the industry has been slow to respond with some justification. Companies expect that as soon as the current turmoil subsides, the Biden administration, which Duckworth completely supports, by the way, will shift back to hostile rhetoric, anti-energy legislative proposals, and oppositional regulatory policies. This is all their own doing. The article goes on. And by the way, this was written by Wayne Stoltenberg and Merrill Matthews. Yes, Mr. Stoltenberg is a former executive vice president and chief financial officer of Vine Energy Incorporated, is chairman of the Dallas-based Institute for Policy Innovation. Mr. Matthews is a resident scholar with the IPI. So these two guys know what they're talking about, is my point. So reading back to the article, oil and gas prices on the New York Mercantile Exchange are at a 5-year highs, but many publicly traded producers are pursuing, by the way, these are, again, publicly traded producers. Do you get that? There's a market for this. This is a commodity. They're publicly traded producers. They have, they certainly cannot be doing price collusion when it comes to this. They're under scrutiny by the SEC, for example. So many of these publicly traded producers are pursuing a strategy that looks like orderly liquidation, only maintaining or modestly increasing production volumes. Meanwhile, they are returning a significant cash to shareholders in dividends and share repurchases. Devon Energy recently issued guidance for 2022 that refers to capital spending in the range of $1.9 billion to $2.2 billion on new well drilling and completing activity, and a production target of 570,000 to 600,000 barrels of oil equivalent a day. That's a modest increase in capital spending from $1.85 billion in 2021, and a modest decrease in production. From 611,000 in the fourth quarter of 2021. Devon also anticipates increased cash returns to shareholders for 2022. So, you talk about price gouging, Senator Duckworth. You talk about excessive profits. Well, guess where those profits are going to? They're going right into people that invest in the fossil fuel industry. They're going right back into pension funds that perhaps also invest in the fossil fuel industry. If they haven't had rogue states like the state of Illinois try and shut pension funds out of investing in that particular industry because they don't like fossil fuels. How stupid is that? Anyway, it goes on. This is really important. Last September, 20 House Democrats introduced the Fossil Free Finance Act, which would require the Federal Reserve Bank to take steps to stop banks from investing in fossil fuel production. The bill's goal was no financing of new or expanded fossil fuel projects after 2022. Oh, gee, Tammy Duckworth, why do you think even if they have a lease on public land, even if they have the permits available, why do you think that they're not going to produce more oil? Well, maybe they can't get the financing. They don't usually have a couple $1 billion sitting around to put in a new drill, plus all the additional money that's needed to make that drilling profitable. That's going to take a few years to come to fruition. No, your party wants to shut them out of financing. That's what your party's doing. Do you think you could make a different signal? Do you think you could do that, Tammy Duckworth? Going on. Then there's the harping about excessive profits, which led Senator Elizabeth Warren to propose a new tax. So Duckworth is just like Elizabeth Warren. Do you think she represents Illinois? No, she represents Massachusetts. Duckworth, what Tammy Duckworth too. She's got like this modest home in Schaumburg that she lives in, or Hanover Park, one of the two. But her real home, her really expensive, like $1 million plus home, is actually on the East Coast, right in the D.C. area. That's where she spends her time. That's what she does. So anyway, going back, Elizabeth Warren proposed this new tax. The oil companies need to understand that the benefits of price gouging will be sharply undercut by a tax that's not across the board, but instead is a tax on how their profits increase during this short-term crisis, she declaimed. Now, oil prices have fluctuated tremendously in just the last decade, and they've been extremely low, where nobody could make a profit, to now they're at record highs. There was a time when most people understood that if you want, the article goes on, that most people understood that if you want less of something, tax it. If you want more of it, subsidize it. Even though Democrats' more radical legislation is unlikely to pass, the message to participants in the highly regulated financial markets is clear. We want to see less, not more, capital flowing to domestic oil and gas production. Couple more paragraphs that are really important. Oil and gas producers are subject to many of the same supply chain roadblocks and price increases that hinder other industries. If they can't find willing long-term capital providers, it is difficult for them to ramp up production. And they can't find that funding primarily because they've been the target of a multi-year mission to defund and destroy the industry. If investors and producers are acting as though they don't hear the current administration's demands for more drilling now, it's in large part because they heard their condemnations for drilling in the past. Absolutely. High gas prices, they're not going away soon. Not with these people in charge. Not with these people in charge. So $6 gas in the suburbs is going to become $7 a gallon gas. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? You're going to blame the fossil fuel energy companies? Is that what you're going to do? No, you need to blame the politicians, because just 2 years ago, it wasn't like this. It wasn't like this at all. Anyway, change out the politicians, you get different policy. So this is the real story with Jeanne Ives, because we want to connect the dots on policy so that you make better choices in the future so we can all thrive. So in order to help me spread the news, I want you to go to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Rumble, Instagram, and Twitter. If you could follow, like, and share our content, that would be very, very helpful. You can always go to our website, breakthrough-ideas.com as well, and sign up for our weekly newsletter. I think you'll find it informative. Back for a final segment. Thank you. Welcome back to segment 3. So I'm going to close out this podcast with just a reminder to everybody that in Illinois, June 28th is when our primary election is. But you can start voting already. You can early vote. If you're living in DuPage County, you can early vote right now at the DuPage County Fairgrounds, and other locations that may be more closer to you will start to open June 13th. I'm going to read to you something that I wrote and put this into my precinct commitment letter, and I'm going to ask that you do not vote by mail unless you have no other options. Of course, we want you to vote. If your only option is to vote by mail, we understand. But the reason for that is you're not going to actually place your own ballot in the tabulator, and you're going to trust other people instead to verify, store, and count your ballot properly. Now, I participated in the Bob Grogan recount, and I personally witnessed ballots that were left in the envelope and that were also loose in the entire bin of envelopes. What does that mean? Those ballots were not counted. And what I saw personally really makes me very suspicious of using vote by mail in the future. More importantly, there's also, the larger the haystack or the volume of legal vote by mail, it's harder to spot the fraudulent vote by mail, which is something we still do need to root out. We're doing an election integrity project right now at Breakthrough Ideas, as a matter of fact, and we, again, separated people that are pretty much already moved out of DuPage County. We already have like 50 people that have requested vote by mail ballots that moved out of the county. We're verifying that information again, but this is what's happening. You've got fraudulent votes that do occur. Here's another piece of advice, though. If you've already have a vote by mail ballot, you can take it with you if you want to vote in person, and you can surrender that ballot to the election judge. You should make sure that the judge writes spoiled across both sides of the vote by mail ballot and the return envelope, and then places that into the spoiled ballot envelope. They will then record you as having returned and spoiled that vote by mail ballot, and then they'll issue an actual in-person ballot that you can vote instead. So if you've already requested vote by mail ballot and you're hearing this message and you want to vote in person, no problem, you can do that. Just bring your ballot with you and make sure they mark it spoiled. Another thing to be aware of, again, the polls open in Illinois at 6 a.m. They close at 7 p.m. There's still a need for election judges, and a press release from the DuPage County clerk came out saying that there is a pay increase for election judges. So the election day, judges working on election day will receive nearly double the pay. It's going from $130 for the day to $250 for the day. So we still do need election judges. You can sign up at the DuPage County election website to do that, or you can go in person and sign up as well. There's still time to be trained and be helpful for that. Also, if you're not going to be an election judge, maybe you're already a committeeman, you could probably be a poll watcher for a candidate, and that means you're just watching the procedures and making sure that they are all in accordance with the law. So still much work to be done. Again, voting is going on right now, so the sooner you actually let other people know who you think should be, who you would suggest that they vote for, then, the more influence you're going to have, the more people you talk to. I have personally put out my recommendations for state legislative races and above. I have put that out just today on Facebook, on my personal Facebook and my political Facebook that I still have open. So if you are friends with me there, you can always go there and check it out. So that's all I have for today. Again, please like and share our content, and you can find our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, Instagram, and Twitter. And our website is breakthrough-ideas.com. I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter, and you'll receive a newsletter once a week on Sunday morning, and it'll have a lot of good information for you, including a number of events that are coming up. Again, the way that we're going to win in the future is for everybody to be as informed as they need to be so that we can make great policy choices so that our nation can prosper for many generations to come. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.